I've started watching The Boys, and what's hilarious to me is a lot of people try to throw Homelander against people who objectively tear him to pieces with negative difficulty, but I decided that I think a more fair matchup was due for this villain. These two monsters were both created by and very, very much devastate the people around them. Homelander's opponent will be Godzilla -1. Because if you squint at it a little bit, they share a similarity. Not only were they made by people, and thus caused the people around them to be harmed, but they also seem to be following after war veterans. I think that's enough of an excuse to have them fight to the death. Especially since Homelander very clearly challenged Butcher with that intention just because he was bored. A giant monster? It's probably exciting to him. So, since he's the guest on the channel, how strong is the Homelander? Can he really do whatever the fuck he wants? Let's find out. Homelander's scaling is a bit weird. He's shown to be somewhere between wall level and city level if you take high ends. Now that's a big range, but let's try to narrow it down a little bit. So, we have some statements that it would take nuclear bombs, basically, to kill the likes of Soldier Boy, who is below Homelander, but can fight him, and can seemingly draw blood, and probably kill him with that beam attack of his. He's only considered almost Homelander level. As for Homelander, one of Vought's associates stated more than once that no weapon on Earth is capable of killing Homelander, or that they've tried them and they all failed. Which is as vague comes, because for all we know, they just planted a bomb next to him and he just flew away. Or lasered it before it actually exploded. But if we do take it at its highest end, then that would mean that modern nuclear weapons were unable to kill Homelander. This would mean at maximum a B2, which generates an explosive yield of up to 1.2 megatons of TNT. This might be sort of consistent, considering that in Boys the Diabolical, which has a few canon episodes, one soup was able to create a thunderstorm calculating to town to large town level. Homelander is the strongest soup, he would upscale this. However, there's really not a lot of consistency for that high level of scaling. If you want to talk about more consistent stuff, it would probably be more in the multi-city block levels of territory. We see this with a slightly younger Homelander being in the middle of a chemical plant explosion that was multi-city block, and he's actually injured. There's scratches all over his face. And it's not blood, we can clearly see that they are actually damage. Not much damage, but still damage. If you want to be a jerk about the surface area, then Homelander only took a city block amount of that energy. Another feat is at the end of Season 3, Soldier Boy's explosion was city block level, and Maeve survived it. Maeve, who is definitely weaker than Homelander, although by Season 3 she got strong enough to be able to at least draw blood from multiple hits to the nose. He also upscales a lot of building stuff, but obviously that's not too important. Now for speed. Speed is probably going to be the even more contentious one. Homelander's flight speed is consistently shown in the supersonic ranges, though he's usually not really trying, so him looking for translucent at Mach 1.5 is probably not super important. I mean, after all, he did say he broke the sound barrier as a little kid. However, Homelander has a better feat, catching Butcher before an explosion reached it from point-blank range, getting all the way up to Mach 18 to even Mach 30. Pretty impressive for the Homelander. There's, of course, the higher estimate in the room of light speed. There is a notable problem with light speed, though. For Starlight's case, she was blitzed by an A-Train who's canonically supersonic, even at his absolute peaks. Pretty inconsistent. Now, what might be more consistent are the lasers shown by Homelander and Butcher when he gets the Temp V. However, nobody really reacts to the lasers after they're fired. Butcher missed a shot on Homelander during their fight, and Soldier Boy has blocked the lasers a couple times, but they're sort of aim blocked. So since they're aim blocks, or the shield was already ready for a block to begin with, Can we really say that they're light speed? Now, the lasers themselves may be light speed, but since nobody really reacts to them, I think it is kind of disingenuous to say that people scale to them in combat. And despite Starlight's power being, literally using light, when she's outsped by somebody who has consistent Mach feats, thing you could say to that is either A-Train's just holding back all the time, like a lot, or Starlight's attacks aren't light speed, or the show's just stupid as fuck sometimes. Which, option 3 is totally on the table. Now, on to Godzilla. Since the previous -1 video had some questionable audio, I'll restart from scratch. Physically, -1 is capable of tearing apart buildings with his bare claws and ripping apart large ships. However, he shows a more impressive feat with his tail, pulverizing 5 50-meter buildings to ash, a feat calculating to multi-city block level, over 800 tons of TNT. His durability, of course, would scale to that, though in smaller areas he can be harmed by lesser attacks, like the Dachau's battleship guns, though lesser things like tank shells and other ship fire really don't seem able to do much of anything to him. Though we do know that 20 tons right in the mouth when he was firing his atomic breath was enough to blow up his head. Minus should be more powerful. This is because, based on how powerful his nuclear breath is, -1's attack would be up to 17 megatons of TNT. He was also stated to be the most powerful weapon on Earth. The mutated lizard is considered a weapon. One could argue he's even more powerful than things like earthquakes and such. This backs up other statements that he was considered unstoppable and like a third atomic bomb, etc. Lesser blasts are also able to completely vaporize chunks of ocean and large ships, resulting in at least 10 levels of energy. So the big one in Ginza being 17 megatons seems fairly consistent. His body is also able to withstand some of the recoil of his own atomic breath, although he is usually burned at least somewhat by it. He seems to take less damage though over the course of the movie, so you can argue Godzilla might be getting even stronger over time. As for his own speed, he nearly caught up to a plane that was moving at 400 knots, with it being just out of range of melee attacks like his tail swipe and bites. Pixel scaling his atomic breath gets it from the super to hypersonic ranges, though in terms of just direct statements, it is a beam of light. It doesn't much look like light, but he is literally just throwing radiation out of his face until it collects to a point that it explodes, similar to a nuclear bomb. How would the fight go? Both our combatants are consistently in the multi-city block physical ranges, with small outliers in the city block or lesser territory being able to affect them, and statements overall of being more powerful than any sort of weapon on the Earth. Now, while you could argue these statements are better for Homelander because he comes at a later time, we've also dismantled a lot of the super powerful weapons that were made during the 60s, so both technically have the same sort of statements, really. In terms of raw feats, at the very least though, -1 actually has a city-busting feat to prove that he is capable. Homelander said he would wipe New York off the map, but that could be over time. He could be spamming heat vision all over the place, etc, etc. Minus can compensate with this due to very quick regeneration, able to regrow huge chunks like a missing cheek in mere moments, and would have actually regrown his head after he was decapitated. The only reason he died in the movie is because his own atomic breath turned on him without a means of venting the energy, and even then, chunks were healing anyway. Now that said, Homelander has a massive physical speed advantage. While Godzilla might be in 400 knots, Homelander is over Mach 18, so he would be zipping around the giant beast all the time, punching it, doing some damage, but nothing that he couldn't heal from. His heat vision doesn't really seem capable of cauterizing wounds either, since most of the people he lasers tend to just gush blood, so he has no means of actually killing -1, and -1 has a pretty solid means of killing Homelander, that being his atomic breath. But would it land is the question. Homelander will definitely see Minus charging up, since normal people could react to the charge up, though he does seem to get faster with it over time. It still doesn't seem to be any notable speed feat. Homelander is extremely arrogant though, So I could actually see him trying to face tank the atomic breath. If he does, or tries to beam clash it like Superman did, he's going to die. The only thing I could think of is if he tries to avoid it last moment, like how he tried to evade Soldier Boy's nuclear blast so that he didn't, get depowered and die. So I'm trying to think if Homelander's arrogance would outweigh his survival instincts kicking in. That said, though, I don't think he really has any means of actually stopping the beam. His lasers are too thin to really interrupt Godzilla from charging up, and any damage that they do would be surface level, or he'd have to really try to blast through him. Either way, most likely the beam would go off, and if it does, Homelander would have a very hard time reacting to it, since it's also a light beam and could shoot from multiple kilometers. The explosion has a radius of 6 kilometers, so I think that Homelander would be caught by it. Minus takes a bit to heal himself after he fires another atomic breath, but he can recharge fairly quickly if he really depends on it. So ultimately, I would give the win to Godzilla, because he has really the only means of actually killing Homelander. I just don't think Homelander has any means of actually putting -1 down. Big shout out to Professor Fiction. He helped me with a lot of the boys stuff, since I was just watching the show and trying to dig up crap on my own. Yeah, he's really the only credible boys scaler that I've seen. As for the -1 stuff, well, you've seen me cover it before. And I feel like I'm forgetting something. Some cringe-inducing furry, perhaps. Ah well, it's probably no one important. That'll be all for this one. See you next time.